Before I found out what my own family was planning behind my back, I honestly believed I'd already lived through the worst kind of heartbreak. I was wrong. Nothing could have prepared me for the moment I realized the people who were supposed to love me most were secretly plotting to steal the only thing I had ever truly been given. And when I uncovered their plan, I made sure they would never forget the consequences. My name is Megan Hartwell. I'm 34 years old, and for as long as I can remember, I was the daughter who always came second. While my younger sister, Tiffany, was handed every opportunity, every luxury, and every ounce of attention, I learned to survive on whatever scraps were left behind. This is the story of how years of favoritism finally caught up with my family, and how their biggest betrayal became the moment I finally stood up for myself. It all started one ordinary evening. I was standing quietly in the hallway outside my parents' kitchen, holding a box filled with old family photographs I'd promised to organize. The warm light from the kitchen spilled into the hallway while I searched for a place to set the box down. Then I heard my mother's voice. She sounded calm, relaxed, like she was discussing dinner plans. "We'll wait until Megan leaves for Europe. 3 weeks gives us plenty of time to hire a locksmith, clear out her things, and put the penthouse on the market. $1 million will wipe out Tiffany's credit cards and finally get her settled somewhere decent." My heart stopped. Before I could even process what she'd said, my father answered without the slightest hesitation. "The market's perfect right now. We could have everything sold before she even gets back to the States. By the time she lands, it'll all be over." The box slipped from my hands. I barely caught it before it crashed onto the hardwood floor. My fingers dug into the cardboard so tightly they hurt. They weren't talking about just any property. They were talking about my grandfather's penthouse. The home he had left to me. The only thing in my entire life that had ever belonged solely to me. I couldn't move. My back pressed against the hallway wall as my pulse thundered in my ears. Every word coming from that kitchen felt like another knife twisting deeper into my chest. I peeked through the doorway just enough to see my father pulling out his phone. "I'll call Tiffany's cousin Nicole tomorrow," he said. "She can help move everything. We'll just tell her Tiffany needs somewhere temporary to stay. She won't ask too many questions." My mother nodded as if they'd already won. Tiffany's been struggling ever since that Cabo trip, and after that shopping spree last month, she's drowning in debt. She deserves a fresh start. Megan has a good career. She'll manage. She can always find someplace smaller. Something smaller. Those two words echoed in my mind. A smaller place. Just like the tiny studio apartment I'd spent years living in because I couldn't afford anything better. The same years my parents happily paid for Tiffany's expensive photography hobby, her luxury camera equipment, her gap year traveling across Europe, her endless finding herself, adventures that somehow never required her to find a job. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. The metallic taste filled my mouth as I fought to stay silent. This wasn't just betrayal. They were calmly planning to steal my home, and they spoke about it with the same certainty they'd shown my entire life whenever they decided Tiffany deserved something more than I did. I couldn't listen another second. I slipped out the front door without making a sound, leaving the box of photographs forgotten in my car. The drive back to Chicago felt unreal. Streetlights blurred together through my windshield while their conversation replayed over and over inside my head. Hire a locksmith. Pack up her belongings. Sell the penthouse before she even knows. Every sentence hit harder than the last. What hurt the most wasn't even the plan itself.
It was how normal it sounded to them.
They weren't arguing. They weren't questioning whether it was wrong. To them, stealing from their own daughter was simply another task to check off a list. When I finally unlocked the penthouse door, a familiar scent greeted me. Old books. Polished wood. Fresh coffee lingering from that morning. The moment I stepped inside, it felt as though my grandfather was still there protecting me. Papa Victor had lived in this penthouse for over 30 years. Every room carried a memory. The floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The grand piano he polished every week even though he rarely played it anymore. The shelves lined with worn leather-bound novels he used to read aloud while we spent entire summers together. Those summers had become my escape. While my parents rushed from one of Tiffany's dance recitals to another, Papa Victor made sure I never felt completely forgotten. Looking around the living room now, I realized something painful. He had understood my family long before I ever did. He saw exactly how my parents treated us. My father, Derek. My mother, Sandra. And Tiffany, the younger sister who somehow became the center of everyone's universe the day she was born. She was 6 years younger than me, yet somehow every family decision revolved around her happiness. When Tiffany wanted professional dance lessons at 10 years old, my parents enrolled her in the most expensive studio in Chicago without blinking an eye. At 16, I asked if I could join my high school's debate club. The membership fee wasn't even a fraction of Tiffany's dance tuition. Dad looked at me sympathetically and said money was tight that year. A week later, they surprised Tiffany with a brand new laptop. That was the day I stopped asking for things. Straight-A report cards earned me little more than a quick glance. Meanwhile, Tiffany's finger paintings were praised like masterpieces worthy of hanging in a museum. Whenever I accomplished something, the conversation ended quickly. Whenever Tiffany breathed, the entire family celebrated. Eventually, I accepted that if I wanted something, I'd have to earn it myself. I worked evening shifts at the library, tutored students every weekend, saved every dollar I could because no one else was going to help me, except one person. Papa Victor noticed everything. Sometimes he'd quietly knock on my bedroom door carrying a slice of homemade pie. Other weekends, he'd invite me downtown to stay with him at the penthouse. There, sitting beside the enormous windows overlooking the lake, he taught me how to play chess. His favorite lesson had nothing to do with the game itself. Always think several moves ahead, he'd tell me with a gentle smile. And never reveal your strategy before it's time. Those words stayed with me long after the games ended. Papa Victor never missed my victories. When I earned a full scholarship through years of hard work, he was the first person to celebrate. When I landed a competitive internship without anyone pulling strings for me, he took me out to dinner because he said accomplishments earned through effort deserve to be honored. My parents barely noticed. One afternoon, while we were playing chess by the window overlooking Lake Michigan, Papa Victor looked at me with an expression I'll never forget. "They don't love you less because you're lacking," he said quietly. "They love the version of themselves they see in Tiffany. She's carefree, charming, and reflects the dreams they never achieved. You remind them of discipline, responsibility, and independence. That forces them to face parts of themselves they'd rather ignore." At the time, I didn't fully understand what he meant. Years later, his words made perfect sense. When I graduated from college with honors after working nights and weekends to pay my own tuition, I searched the crowd for my family. Only one face was there. Papa Victor's. My parents had skipped the ceremony because Tiffany had decided to extend another trip overseas. They mailed me a congratulation card instead. Just a card. No hugs. No celebration. No pride. Standing inside the penthouse now, those memories hit me all at once. This place wasn't valuable because of the expensive view. It wasn't valuable because of the money. It mattered because it represented something I'd waited my entire life to receive. Someone had finally chosen me. Someone had looked at me and said, "You matter." And now, my own parents wanted to steal that away just to erase Tiffany's shopping debt. The hurt slowly transformed into something colder. Something sharper. Not panic. Not sadness. Determination. They believed I would be thousands of miles away in Europe while they carried out their little plan. They thought I'd never know until everything was already sold. They had absolutely no idea what I was about to do. For the next 3 days, I didn't tell anyone what I'd overheard. I barely slept. Instead, I planned. Every conversation replayed in my head while I figured out exactly how many moves ahead I needed to think. Just like Papa Victor had taught me. I also remembered the forgotten box of photographs still sitting in my car. When I brought it upstairs, I spent nearly an hour looking through the pictures. There were dozens of photos from summers we'd spent together. Me feeding ducks by the lake. The two of us laughing over chess games. Birthday dinners. Christmas mornings. Simple moments that meant everything. I placed several framed photos on the mantle where they belonged. Looking at them reminded me why I couldn't let anyone take this home away from me. A few days later came our usual Sunday family dinner. For the first time in my life, I walked into that house already knowing everyone around the table was lying to me. Somehow, I smiled anyway. Mom had prepared Tiffany's favorite meal: roast chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, green beans seasoned exactly the way Tiffany liked them. Dad carved the chicken while Tiffany happily talked about another creative project she was supposedly working on. Nicole had shown up unexpectedly with a bottle of wine, smiling politely as always. She had no idea she was already part of my parents' plan. I waited patiently. Then, during one of those quiet pauses that happen naturally at dinner, I spoke as casually as I could. My company finally confirmed the London project. Everyone looked up. I'll be flying out Friday, I continued. Looks like I'll be in Europe for about 3 weeks. Mom's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. 3 weeks? She asked, trying to sound surprised. That's quite a long time. I nodded. It's a major client. They want everything handled in person. Dad wiped his hands with a napkin before speaking. Europe's nice this time of year, he said. You'll probably have good weather. I smiled. So I've heard. Across the table, Tiffany forced a smile that never reached her eyes. That sounds exciting, she said. Where are you staying? A hotel near the office district, I answered. Nothing luxurious. Just close to work. Then I saw it. A quick glance between Mom and Dad. Another from Dad to Tiffany. Tiny smiles. Barely noticeable. But I noticed. They thought everything was falling perfectly into place. Inside, I felt sick. Outside, I kept eating dinner as though nothing had happened. Friday morning finally arrived. Gray clouds covered Chicago, matching exactly how I felt. But instead of driving toward O'Hare Airport, I drove downtown. I checked into a quiet hotel overlooking the Chicago River. The receptionist handed me a key card without asking a single question. Perfect. Anonymous. Exactly what I needed. A few days earlier, I'd ordered several discrete security cameras online using my company's account. They'd been delivered directly to the hotel so no one could trace them back to my penthouse. That evening, after it got dark, I slipped into my building through the service entrance. I avoided the main lobby on purpose. The fewer neighbors who saw me, the better. One by one, I installed the cameras. One in the living room, one facing the hallway, another covering the kitchen and entryway. Every important angle, every possible entrance. Once everything was connected, I opened the monitoring app on my phone. Crystal clear video. Perfect audio. Motion alerts. Exactly what I needed. Then came the most important step. I called the Chicago Police Department's non-emergency line. Keeping my voice calm, I explained everything I'd overheard. I even told the officer I had secretly recorded my parents' conversation that night in the hallway after realizing what they were planning. Their voices were unmistakable. Every detail of the scheme was captured. The officer listened carefully. He didn't dismiss me. He didn't tell me it was just a family disagreement. Instead, he gave me a case number, documented everything, and assured me that if anyone attempted to enter my home illegally, officers would respond immediately. He also arranged secure access to the live camera feed if it became necessary. When I finally hung up the phone, I stared out the hotel window at the city lights reflecting across the river. Everything was ready. Now all I had to do was wait. By the way, if you're still with me and enjoying this unbelievable story, don't forget to subscribe. There are many more true stories of betrayal, justice, and unforgettable twists coming your way. 2 days passed in complete silence. Every notification that buzzed on my phone made my heart race, but nothing happened. Then, just after 10 o'clock that morning, my phone vibrated. Motion detected. I grabbed it so fast I almost dropped it. The live camera feed opened instantly. A white locksmith's van had just pulled up outside my building. My stomach tightened. This was it. I watched as my father stepped out of his car and walked over to greet the locksmith like they were old friends. He casually pointed toward the entrance while my mother stood nearby, pretending to look up and down the street as if she were simply waiting for someone. She wasn't. She was making sure no one was paying attention. A few minutes later, Tiffany arrived carrying several empty moving boxes. She looked excited. Not nervous. Not guilty. Excited. Nicole showed up last. Unlike everyone else, she looked uncomfortable from the moment she walked in. She kept glancing around the lobby as though something about the situation didn't feel right, but she stayed quiet. Together, the four of them entered the building. I watched through the hallway camera as the elevator doors opened on my floor. My family walked toward my front door without hesitation. The locksmith knelt beside the smart lock and unpacked his tools. The soft clicking sounds echoed through the live audio. Every second felt like an hour. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My own parents, standing outside my home, waiting for someone to break into it. Then,
Click.
the lock released. The door slowly swung open. Without missing a beat, they walked inside as if they owned the place. My mother headed straight toward my bedroom. Tiffany immediately started pulling books off my shelves and tossing them into moving boxes. Nicole lingered near the entrance for a moment before quietly wrapping dishes from my kitchen. She still looked unsure. Then my father pulled out his phone. I held my breath as he made the call. "Yes," he said confidently. "The place is vacant now. We can have professional photos taken tomorrow and list it before the end of the week." Vacant. He actually called my home vacant. That single word shattered whatever hope I still had that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. There was no doubt anymore. They fully intended to steal everything. I immediately picked up my phone and called the officer handling my report. "They're inside," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'm watching them on the cameras right now." "I understand," he replied. "Units are already on the way." Those next few minutes felt endless. Inside the penthouse, everyone continued packing. My mother opened closet doors. Tiffany folded my clothes without a second thought. Dad kept making phone calls about the sale. No one looked guilty. No one hesitated. Then, a loud knock echoed through the apartment. Every person inside froze. Another knock. Even louder. "Chicago police," a voice called from the hallway. "Open the door." My father slowly turned toward the entrance. The color drained from his face. For the first time that day, he looked afraid. My mother dropped the box she was carrying. It crashed onto the hardwood floor. Pieces of my grandmother's china exploded across the room. Tiffany stood completely frozen, one of my sweaters still clutched tightly in her hands. Nicole backed against the wall, staring at the front door with wide eyes. Another officer knocked. "Chicago police. Open the door immediately." Dad finally walked over and unlocked the door. Two uniformed officers stepped inside. The room fell completely silent. "We received a report of unauthorized entry into this residence," one officer said firmly. "Everyone step back and identify yourselves." Dad forced an awkward smile. "This is all just a misunderstanding," he said. "We're family. We have permission to be here." The officer didn't even react. Instead, he held up his phone. "I'd like you to listen to something." A recording began playing. My mother's voice filled the room. "We'll wait until Megan's overseas." Then my father's voice. "Hire the locksmith." Then Tiffany talking about moving everything before I returned. Every word, every plan, every lie, recorded, crystal clear. The silence that followed was almost painful. No one spoke. No one even tried. The officers immediately separated everyone for questioning. The locksmith was called back inside and interviewed as a witness. He explained that he'd been hired by my father and believed they had legal authority to access the property. Officers photographed everything. The packed moving boxes. My belongings stacked by the door. The broken china. The open closets. Even a real estate agent, who was still on speakerphone, became part of the report after officers documented the conversation. The evidence was overwhelming. There was nowhere left to hide. My father stood with his head lowered, saying almost nothing. The confident man who'd spent weeks planning this scheme had suddenly run out of words. My mother covered her face with both hands. Whether she was crying or simply avoiding eye contact, I couldn't tell. Tiffany finally broke down. She started sobbing uncontrollably. For perhaps the first time in her life, she was discovering that actions have consequences. Nicole quietly stared at the floor, visibly shaken. I genuinely believed she hadn't known the full truth until that moment. The officers issued citations for criminal trespass and warned everyone that they were to leave the property immediately. Failure to comply would lead to arrest. One by one, they walked out. The moving boxes stayed behind. The locksmith shook his head before quietly following the officers into the hallway. Finally, the front door closed. The apartment became completely still. I sat alone in my hotel room staring at the camera feed. The adrenaline that had carried me through the day slowly faded, leaving behind nothing but exhaustion. There was no victory celebration, no happiness, only relief. The line had finally been crossed. And after everything that happened inside that penthouse, I knew our family would never be the same again. By the following week, the entire situation had taken on a life of its own. News spread quickly through Chicago's close-knit circles. Residents in my building had noticed the police cars outside, and before long, people were asking questions. The building's community app buzzed with speculation about what had happened on the penthouse floor. Friends began texting me, asking if everything was okay. I kept every response short. "It's a legal matter," I'd reply. "It's being handled." The first person to feel the consequences was Tiffany. She worked for a marketing firm that took its public image seriously. After someone mentioned the police incident on a neighborhood forum, one of Tiffany's coworkers recognized our family name. The story spread through her office faster than any of us expected. Within a week, she was fired. My parents weren't willing to accept defeat. Instead, they hired an attorney and filed a lawsuit to challenge Papa Victor's will. They claimed he had been manipulated. They argued he wasn't mentally competent when he signed the documents and insisted the penthouse should never have been left solely to me. When my lawyer reviewed the paperwork, he couldn't help but smile. "They don't have a case," he told me confidently. Papa Victor had prepared for everything. His will had been properly notarized. Independent witnesses had signed it. Medical professionals had examined him and confirmed he was of sound mind when every document was executed. The language in the will couldn't have been clearer. The penthouse belonged to me, and only me. Over the next several months, court dates came and went. My parents' attorney filed motion after motion, hoping to find some technicality that would change the outcome. Every attempt failed. Then came another unexpected turning point.
Nicole agreed to testify.
Under oath, she admitted my parents had asked her to help move furniture because they claimed Tiffany simply needed temporary housing. She explained that she had never been told about hiring a locksmith or secretly selling my property. Her testimony destroyed what little credibility my parents had left. The judge dismissed every allegation of undue influence. Their lawsuit collapsed. By the time it was over, my parents had spent well over $10,000 in legal fees, money they never expected to lose. Ironically, the very sale they had hoped would rescue Tiffany's finances had now left them struggling with their own. The public court filings only made things worse.
People talked.
Neighbors whispered. Friends quietly distanced themselves. Tiffany couldn't find another full-time job. Every interview seemed promising until someone connected her name to the story. Eventually, she moved back into my parents' house. The daughter they had spent years rescuing now depended on them more than ever. Only this time, they were the ones running out of money. Dad stopped attending community events. Mom avoided social gatherings whenever possible. The embarrassment became impossible to escape. About 3 weeks after everything happened, Tiffany sent me a message. "I'm sorry," she wrote. "You know I was desperate. Mom and Dad said everything would work out for everyone." I read the message several times. Not once did she truly take responsibility. There was always someone else to blame. I never replied. Some bridges burn because they were never built on anything solid to begin with. A few days later, Nicole reached out. She apologized sincerely for getting involved. She admitted she'd trusted my parents without asking enough questions and said watching the police walk through my front door had completely changed the way she saw the entire family. She asked if we could meet someday. I believed she meant every word. But healing doesn't happen overnight. I thanked her for her honesty and told her I needed time and space. She understood. The final court hearing came and went without any surprises. The judge officially upheld Papa Victor's will. My parents were ordered to pay court costs in addition to their own legal expenses. This time, They didn't appeal. They finally accepted that they had lost. Then came something I never expected. Silence. The phone stopped ringing. The messages disappeared. One day I realized I had quietly been removed from the family group chat. No announcement. No explanation. Just erased. Mom tried calling one last time after the final ruling. I watched the phone ring until it went silent. There was nothing left to say. Over the following months, life slowly settled into a new rhythm. Tiffany started taking small freelance jobs to support herself while continuing to live with our parents. For the first time in her life, she had to earn her own way. My parents tightened their budget and faced financial pressures they had never imagined. As for me, I finally moved back into the penthouse. But this time it felt different. Peaceful. The tension I'd carried for years seemed to disappear the moment I walked through the front door. I rearranged the furniture, filled the balcony with plants, converted Papa Victor's old study into my home office. Little by little, it truly became my home. One quiet Saturday afternoon, while organizing one of his old desk drawers, I found something hidden behind a stack of files. An envelope. My name was written across the front in Papa Victor's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a letter dated only a few months before he passed away. As I read each line, tears blurred my vision. He wrote about watching me grow into a woman who never gave up, no matter how unfair life had been. He told me he admired my strength, my kindness, my determination. He said every achievement I'd earned meant more because I'd earned it without anyone carrying me. Then I reached the final paragraph. I wanted this penthouse to be more than a gift, he wrote. I wanted it to be your foundation, a place where you would always know you were chosen. Then came the sentence that completely broke me. You are enough, Megan. You always were. Never let anyone convince you otherwise. I sat in his chair overlooking Lake Michigan and cried harder than I had in years. I wasn't crying only because I missed him. I cried for the little girl who spent her childhood wondering why she was never enough. I cried for the years I wasted chasing approval that was never going to come. And I cried because for the first time in my life, I finally believed his words. When the tears finally stopped, the silence around me felt different. It wasn't lonely anymore. It was freedom. I no longer needed my parents to acknowledge my worth. I didn't need Tiffany's approval. I didn't need anyone's permission to live the life I'd built for myself. The penthouse wasn't just an inheritance. It was proof that someone had seen me exactly as I was and loved me without conditions. Over time, it became filled with new memories. Friends gathered around my dining table for long dinners. The study echoed with late nights of work and quiet accomplishment. The balcony bloomed with the same flowers Papa Victor had always cared for. Meanwhile, my parents continued living with the consequences of their own choices. Financial hardship, damaged reputations, broken relationships, and the painful realization that years of favoritism had finally cost them the very family they thought they controlled. As for me, I learned the greatest lesson of all. Family isn't defined by blood alone. Real family is made up of the people who see your value, believe in you, and choose you, even when no one else does. Papa Victor gave me far more than a beautiful home. He gave me the confidence to finally choose myself. And that turned out to be the greatest inheritance of all. If you've stayed with me until the end, thank you so much for listening. Now I want to ask you something. What would you have done if you were in my place? Could you ever forgive family after a betrayal like this? Or would you walk away for good? Share your thoughts in the comments. I genuinely want to hear your perspective. And if stories like this resonate with you, don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.